The piercing sound of the ambulance sliced through the crisp autumn morning air. On the asphalt, shards of glass reflected the sunlight like shattered diamonds, while a crowd gathered around the motionless body of a young woman. Her long golden hair spread across the ground, creating a heartbreaking contrast with the red slowly pooling beneath her. In that moment, time seemed to freeze and Sarah Bennett's fate changed forever. Just 3 hours earlier, Sarah had been on top of the world. At 17, her face was the latest sensation on national runways. During her last photo shoot, she had left the Vogue team in awe with her magnetic presence. The photographer, a seasoned industry veteran known for his demanding demeanor, lowered his camera and declared, "In 20 years of photographing models, I've never seen anyone with this much potential." Sarah wasn't just another pretty face in the crowd. Her story began in a small rural town where her mother, Rachel, worked as a literature teacher. From an early age, Sarah displayed a unique determination. While other girls dreamed of fairy tales, she spent hours practicing her posture in front of the cracked mirror in her room, using her mother's old curtains as haute couture dresses. "You have something special, sweetheart," Rachel would say, watching her daughter strut down the narrow hallway of their modest home. "But promise me you'll never forget who you are." Sarah took those words to heart, staying focused on her studies even as her career began to soar at 15. In just 2 years, she had transformed from a local promise to a nationally recognized name. Her photos graced the covers of top fashion magazines, and the biggest designers fought for her presence on their runways. But what captivated people the most wasn't her stunning beauty, it was her humility and dedication. Every Tuesday and Thursday, regardless of her professional commitments, Sarah made it a point to attend her Spanish classes. "Paris can wait," she would say to Diana Matthews, her agent, who constantly tried to convince her to prioritize international work. "My dreams are important, but my education comes first." Lauren Anderson, her best friend since childhood, was one of the few people who truly knew the real Sarah. The two shared secrets during long late-night conversations, planning trips and dreaming about the future. "You're going to conquer the world," Lauren would say, "but don't forget to take me with you." On that fateful Tuesday morning, Sarah woke up earlier than usual. There was something different in the air, an energy she couldn't quite explain. As she got ready, she hummed her favorite song, the one her mother used to sing to her at bedtime when she was little. Breakfast was special. Rachel had made blueberry pancakes, a tradition reserved for important days. "I have a good feeling about today," Sarah said, hugging her mom before heading out. Rachel held her a little tighter than usual, as though her maternal heart sensed something her rational mind couldn't comprehend. "Be careful, my love," were her final words to her daughter that morning. The photo shoot felt like a dream. Sarah was radiant, her green eyes exuding a confidence that seemed to brighten the entire studio. Diana couldn't contain her excitement as she showed the preliminary shots on her tablet. "Paris is no longer a dream, darling. It's a reality. I just got confirmation for Fashion Week." Sarah embraced her agent, tears of joy mixing with the shimmer of gloss on her lips. Years of dedication were finally materializing into something tangible. She could already picture herself walking beneath the lights of the Eiffel Tower, living the dream that had been born in that small-town bedroom. After the photo shoot, Sarah swapped her haute couture outfit for a pair of comfy jeans and a simple blouse. Her hair, once perfectly styled for the camera, was now tied back in a casual ponytail. This was how she loved to feel: natural, authentic, free from the weight of the fashion industry's expectations. Her phone buzzed in her bag. It was a message from Lauren. "Guess who also got accepted into the summer program in Barcelona? I can't wait for us to study together." Sarah smiled, her heart swelling with happiness. Everything seemed to be falling into place perfectly. As she walked toward her language school, Sarah paused in front of a storefront. Her face beamed back at her from a giant billboard, a campaign for a cosmetics brand that had launched the previous week. Seeing her image so large, so present in the city felt surreal. For a moment, she allowed herself to admire just how much she had achieved in such a short time. The traffic light turned green, and Sarah began to cross the street, still typing an excited reply to Lauren. The screech of tires on asphalt was her only warning. The driver, later revealed to be intoxicated, had ignored the red light. The impact was devastating, throwing Sarah several feet forward. The world seemed to slow down. The screams of bystanders sounded distant, like echoes from another universe. Above her, the autumn sky spun, and for a fleeting moment, Sarah felt as though she were floating. Then came the darkness. 3 days passed before she opened her eyes again. The hospital room was quiet, save for the steady beep of the heart monitors. Rachel sat in an uncomfortable chair by the bed, her face etched with sleepless nights and shed tears. Dr. Thompson, an experienced surgeon with gray hair and kind eyes, was the one who delivered the news. His voice was gentle, but each word fell like a hammer on Sarah's heart. The injury was too severe. We did everything we could. The amputation was necessary to save your life. Sarah couldn't cry right away. The shock was too overwhelming, the reality too harsh to process. She looked down to where her left leg should have been and saw only a void wrapped in bandages. Her dreams of Paris, the runways, the international contracts, all of it seemed to vanish, like mist evaporating under the morning sun. Diana visited the next day, bringing flowers and words of comfort that felt hollow in the sterile hospital room. Her pitying gaze said more than her rehearsed phrases. The fashion world, which had once flung its golden doors open for Sarah, now seemed distant, almost unattainable. The nights were the hardest. Alone with her thoughts, Sarah relived the accident over and over again. What if became her constant torment? What if she had left 5 minutes later? What if she had taken a different route? What if she hadn't been replying to that message? Lauren began visiting every day after school, bringing not just homework but a sense of normalcy to days that now felt endless. She talked about school gossip, teachers, and future plans, as if nothing had changed. But everything had. Rachel stayed strong in front of her daughter, but Sarah often heard her crying in the hallway when she thought she was alone. Her mother, always the optimist, now struggled to find words of comfort that didn't sound like empty platitudes. One of those lonely nights, Sarah experienced her first moment of true clarity about her new reality. Gazing at the moon through the hospital window, she realized she was at a crossroads. She could either surrender to despair or summon the strength to rebuild her life, even if the path ahead was nothing like the one she had planned. Dawn brought Dr. Marcus, Sarah's physiotherapist. Tall, with a gentle smile and eyes that radiated a calm confidence, he would become a cornerstone in the journey ahead. Every story has its tough chapters, he said, helping Sarah sit up. But it's often those chapters that lead to the greatest transformations. Sarah didn't know it yet, but those words carried a truth that only time would reveal. Her path was just beginning, and destiny had plans far different, perhaps even more extraordinary, than anything she could have imagined. The days in the hospital stretched on like shadows against blank walls. Sarah watched the clouds drift through the window, marking time between nursing visits. The mirror in her bathroom remained covered. She wasn't ready to face her reflection. In her hands, a small photo album of her runway shows told the story of someone else, a life that now seemed to belong to the past. Rachel, ever present, tried to hold on to hope. Every morning she brought fresh flowers as if their colors could brighten the sterile hospital room. "You've always been stronger than you think," she'd say while gently fixing Sarah's hair. Sarah nodded, though her thoughts were miles away. Dr. Marcus became a steady figure in her new routine. Unlike other professionals whose veiled pity weighed heavy, he pushed her. "The pain you feel today will be your strength tomorrow," he'd say, guiding her through the basics of physiotherapy. Sarah wanted to believe him, but each movement was a stark reminder of what she had lost. It was during one of those therapy sessions that she met Michael, a former Paralympic athlete now working as an adaptive swimming instructor at the hospital. His smile carried the quiet wisdom of someone who had overcome, and his eyes sparkled as he spoke about the transformative power of water. "The pool doesn't judge," he said one morning, watching Sarah struggle through her exercises. "In the water we're all equal." His words struck a chord deep within her, a part of herself she thought had gone silent. Lauren continued to be her bridge to the outside world. On a particularly challenging afternoon, she brought a surprise, a video of Paralympic athletes in competition. "Look at what they can do," she said, her eyes sparkling with anticipation. Sarah watched the footage with a mix of fascination and disbelief. These people didn't seem constrained by their differences, they had transformed them into strength. The first time Sarah entered the hospital pool felt like waking from a long nightmare. Michael was by her side, his presence radiating reassurance. The warm water embraced her like a gentle hug, and for the first time since the accident, she felt her body respond gracefully to her movements. "Take a deep breath and trust," Michael instructed, supporting her as she learned to float. "The water will hold you." Sarah closed her eyes, allowing herself to be in the moment. The underwater silence was unlike anything she had ever experienced. It was peace, it was possibility. The pool sessions became the highlight of her days. Gradually, Sarah discovered a new way to move, a new way to exist in her transformed body. In the water, her missing leg didn't define who she was. Rachel noticed the change in her daughter's demeanor. The light in her eyes, extinguished for so long, was beginning to return. "You seem different after swimming," she remarked one evening as she helped Sarah with her nightly exercises. "In the water, Mom, I feel free," Sarah replied, surprised by her own words. It was the first time she had expressed something positive about her new reality. Diana, her former agent, visited her again, this time with a proposal for an inclusive fashion campaign. "The world is changing, darling. Your story could inspire so many people." Sarah thanked her, but something within her had shifted. The allure of the runway no longer held the same power it once did. One day, after an exceptionally good pool session, Michael shared his own story. He had lost his sight in an accident during his teenage years but found in swimming not just a sport, but a purpose. "Sometimes we need to lose something to discover something greater," he said, his words laden with lived truth. Sarah began researching Paralympic swimming. She spent hours watching competition videos, studying techniques, and absorbing stories of triumph. Her hospital room, once a symbol of confinement, transformed into a hub of planning for a future that was starting to take shape. Lauren noticed the change in her friend and brought more materials about Paralympic sports. "You've always been a natural competitor," she said, reminiscing about how Sarah excelled in everything she set her mind to. "That hasn't changed, it's just found a new path." The nights, once filled with nightmares and silent tears, were now occupied by dreams of Olympic pools and medals. Sarah began to see herself not as a model who had lost everything, but as an athlete in the making. The day of her hospital discharge arrived, marking the turning of a new page in her story. Dr. Marcus handed her a card from Michael with the training schedule for the Adapted Sports Center's pool. "Your body is ready for the next chapter," he said with a proud smile. At home, Sarah finally summoned the courage to look at her full reflection. Her eyes met a different young woman in the mirror, not the runway model, but a woman with a renewed purpose. Her scars told a story of survival, and her posture, once perfected for the camera, now radiated genuine strength. That evening, Rachel found her daughter crying in her room, but these tears were different. "I thought my life was over," Sarah said, clutching Michael's card. "But maybe it's only truly beginning." Her first official training session was a milestone. Michael was there, along with other Paralympic athletes training at the center. Sarah watched how each of them had a unique story, how their differences transformed into strength in the water. "Welcome to the team," said a veteran swimmer, introducing herself as Amanda. Her sincere smile and the prosthetic leg similar to the one Sarah would use made her feel part of something bigger than herself. That night, lying in her bed, Sarah picked up her old journal. The last pages had been blank since the accident. With a new pen she wrote, "Today I learned that some dreams must die for others to be born. And perhaps the new dreams are exactly the ones we were meant to live." The phone rang. It was Lauren, wanting to know how her first training day had gone. "Different from anything I've ever experienced," Sarah replied, her voice carrying excitement that surprised them both. "I think I've found my place." On the wall of her room, where there had once been posters of fashion shows, Sarah hung a picture of the National Paralympic team. Her gaze no longer sought the aesthetic perfection of the runway, but the strength and determination in the faces of those athletes. Michael had told her something that now made perfect sense. In the water, we are not defined by what we've lost, but by what we choose to become. Sarah fell asleep that night with those words in her mind, her heart beating in rhythm with a new dream that was beginning to take shape. The reflection in the locker room mirror told a story of transformation. Sarah adjusted her competition swimsuit with trembling fingers, observing how her body had changed over the past 6 months. It wasn't just physical changes. Her eyes carried a determination that had never been there, even in her most glorious days on the runway. It was her first local competition, and the air seemed thick with expectations. Michael approached silently, his reflection appearing beside hers in the mirror. He always knew when Sarah needed support, even before she realized it herself. "Do you know what I see when I look at you?" he asked, his calm voice cutting through the tension of the moment. "I see someone who's discovered her true strength, not despite the circumstances but because of them." Sarah took a deep breath, letting her coach's words sink into her consciousness. The smell of chlorine, which once bothered her, now brought a strange sense of belonging. It was the scent of her new life, of her morning training sessions, of her small daily victories. In the stands, Rachel and Lauren stood out with a colorful, sparkling banner. "Go Sarah." The large, bold letters made her mother seem younger, lighter. It was as if the weight of the past few months had been temporarily lifted, replaced by the pure joy of watching her daughter reborn into a new life. Amanda, her training partner, came over for a hug before the race. "Remember our first training together?" she whispered in Sarah's ear. "You could barely get in the pool by yourself. Now look at you." The two of them laughed, sharing the memory of those awkward first days. The journey to this point hadn't been easy. Sarah remembered the first few weeks of training, when each movement was a battle not just against the water, but against her own fears. There were mornings when she'd wake up crying, the ghost of her old life haunting her dreams. But little by little, the water became her ally, her silent confidant. Michael had been pivotal in this transformation. He wasn't just a coach, he was a guide, helping her navigate the turbulent waters of her new reality. On one particularly difficult afternoon, when frustration threatened to take over, he shared his own story of overcoming adversity. "I lost my sight when I was 16, he said, sitting by the edge of the pool. "I thought my life was over. I spent months in darkness, not just physically but emotionally, until someone showed me that water doesn't need eyes to be felt, it speaks directly to our soul." These conversations by the pool became sacred moments of learning. Sarah discovered that every athlete there carried a unique story of triumph. Diego, who had lost both his legs in a motorcycle accident, swam with the force of a torpedo. Maria, who was born without her right arm, moved through the water with a grace that defied any limitation. The mornings began before the sun, with strength exercises that made her muscles beg for rest. But Sarah had learned to embrace the pain, it was the price of transformation. Her afternoons were split between the pool and specialized physical therapy sessions, each movement carefully planned to maximize her potential. Lauren continued to be her safe harbor, a link to her former life that helped keep her grounded. On nights when anxiety consumed her, it was Lauren who showed up with hot chocolate and silly college stories. "Remember when you were terrified of water?" she teased. "Who would have thought that scared little girl would become a mermaid?" Diana, her former agent, surprised everyone by showing up at one of her training sessions. Sarah spotted her in the stands watching in silence. After the session, the two talked for a long time about transformations and new beginnings. "You're glowing," Diana said, her eyes misty. "There's more life in you now than in any runway you've ever walked." The first national competition was approaching, bringing with it a fresh wave of anxiety. Sarah spent extra hours in the pool, perfecting every movement, every breath. Michael often had to remind her that rest was also part of training. One particularly restless night, Sarah found her mother in the kitchen, making the same chamomile tea she'd made when Sarah was a child. The familiar aroma brought tears to her eyes. "What if I'm not good enough?" she asked, her voice small and vulnerable. Rachel held her daughter's hands firmly. "You are already more than enough," she replied. "Every time you step into that pool, you prove that there are no limits to the human heart." 1 week before the competition, an unexpected letter arrived. The simple envelope contained words Sarah wasn't prepared to read. It was from the driver who had caused her accident. He wrote about his regret, his battle with alcoholism, and how guilt had driven him to seek help. Sarah tucked the letter in her drawer, alongside other memories that still needed time to be processed. The day of the national championship dawned with a brilliant sun that painted the sky in golden hues. The aquatic center was buzzing with energy. Athletes, coaches, and spectators created an electric atmosphere of anticipation. Sarah felt her stomach flip as she prepared in the locker room. The biggest surprise came when she spotted her father in the stands. Thomas hadn't been present in her life since the divorce years ago. Seeing him there, holding a small flag with her name on it, stirred emotions she didn't know still existed. Michael gathered the team for a final word before the races. The circle of athletes formed around him seemed like a family united by something stronger than blood ties. "Each one of you carries a unique story," he said, his gaze connecting with each athlete. "But today you are not your stories. Today you are athletes, you are warriors, you are living proof that limits exist only in our minds." When the signal sounded, Sarah dove into the water with a grace that surprised even herself. Each stroke carried the weight of her journey, the nights of despair in the hospital, the silent tears in front of the mirror, the cold mornings of training, the encouraging words, the tireless support from her family and friends. The water embraced her like an old friend, guiding her movements with a fluidity that seemed as if it were born with her. Sarah wasn't swimming just for a medal, she was swimming for everyone who ever doubted it was possible to start over, for every moment when she herself nearly gave up. The touch at the pool's edge marked more than the end of a race, it marked the conclusion of a chapter in her life and the beginning of an even more promising one. When Sarah emerged from the water, the world awaiting her was different from the one she had left behind. She was no longer a model who had lost everything. She was an athlete who had found her true purpose. Her father was the first to reach her, his tears mixing with the water streaming down her face. "Forgive me for not being here before," he whispered. Sarah embraced him, realizing that some victories went far beyond medals. That night, as the team celebrated the results of the championship, Sarah observed the group gathered together with a new understanding. Her life hadn't ended on that autumn morning, it had simply taken a different turn, a path that had led her to discover a strength she hadn't known she possessed. Michael approached, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "Are you ready for the next challenge?" he asked, a knowing smile on his face. Sarah nodded, her heart filled with a certainty she'd never felt before. The next chapter of her story was just beginning, and for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid of the unknown. The sun had yet to rise when Sarah arrived at the training center that morning. The silver of her national championship medal glimmered softly in the dim light, hanging in a special spot in her locker. But it wasn't the achievement that drove her, it was the promise of what was yet to come. Michael was waiting for her at the edge of the pool, his serene expression masking the intensity of what he was about to propose. "The Paralympic Games are in 18 months, he said, his calm voice contrasting with the weight of those words. "Are you ready for that challenge?" Sarah felt her heart race. The Paralympic Games had been a distant dream, something she barely allowed herself to consider. Now that possibility loomed before her like an open door, inviting and terrifying all at once. "It won't be easy," Michael continued, his eyes meeting hers. "We'll need to double the intensity of the training. Every second counts, every movement has to be perfect. But you have something special, Sarah. You have the strength that comes from knowing both the fall and the rise." At home, Rachel prepared a special dinner to celebrate her daughter's decision. Lauren showed up with a photo album she had secretly put together, documenting Sarah's journey from her first days in the pool to the medal at the national championship. "Look at this one," Lauren said, pointing to a photo of Sarah on her first day of practice. In it, a frightened young girl clung to the pool's edge, fear clearly visible in her eyes. "And now look at this one." The next photo showed Sarah emerging from the water after her victory at the championship, her face lit up with a radiant smile. The months that followed brought a new, even more demanding routine. Sarah woke up at 4 in the morning, her muscles protesting against the biting cold air. The training sessions became longer and more intense. Michael didn't allow her to settle for anything less than perfection. Amanda, who was also preparing for the Paralympic trials, became an invaluable partner. The two spent extra hours in the pool, perfecting each stroke, every flip turn. In moments of exhaustion, they shared much more than swimming techniques. They shared fears, dreams, and a fierce determination to prove that limitations are only starting points for great achievements. "You know what I admire most about you?" Amanda said one day as they rested after an especially grueling practice. "It's how you turned your pain into purpose. A lot of people spend their whole lives trying to find that." Thomas, Sarah's father, began to show up regularly at the practices. His presence, once so absent, now brought an unexpected comfort. He would sit quietly in the bleachers, watching his daughter with a mixture of pride and regret. One Sunday afternoon, as they shared a coffee, Thomas finally found the courage for a long-overdue conversation. "When you had the accident," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "I ran away. Not because I didn't care but because I cared too much. Seeing you in that situation, it made me realize how much time I had wasted being an absent father." Sarah held her father's hand, feeling the calluses from years of hard work. "Sometimes we have to get lost to find ourselves," she said, surprising herself with the wisdom in her words. "I learned that the hard way." Diana had also become a constant presence in her life, but in a different way. The former agent was now coordinating an inclusion project in fashion, and Sarah occasionally participated in motivational talks, sharing her story with young people facing their own challenges. "You inspire people not just by what you've accomplished," Diana said after one of these talks, "but by showing that sometimes our dreams need to change for us to truly grow." Lauren continued to be her pillar of strength in moments of doubt. On nights when exhaustion felt unbearable, it was she who would show up with homemade food and words of encouragement. "Remember when you thought your life was over?" she would ask, a gentle smile on her face. "Look at you now." The Paralympic trials were approaching, bringing with them a new wave of anxiety. Sarah spent extra hours in the water, each stroke bringing her a step closer to her goal. Michael often had to remind her that rest was also part of training. One of those sleepless nights, Sarah found an old memory box in her room. Among photos of fashion shows and magazine clippings, she found the letter from the driver who had caused her accident. With trembling hands, she finally found the courage to read it in full. The words were simple but carried a deep sense of regret. The man described his own recovery journey, how the accident had been a turning point in his life. He had been sober for a year, dedicating his time to warning young people about the dangers of drinking and driving. Sarah sat on her bed, the letter between her fingers, letting the tears flow freely. They weren't tears of anger or sadness, they were tears of release. That night, she wrote a reply, not to absolve the driver of his guilt, but to share how that moment of tragedy had transformed into a new beginning. The approach of the trials brought an even greater intensity to the training sessions. Michael had assembled a team of specialists, physiotherapists, nutritionists, sports psychologists, all focused on preparing Sarah for the greatest challenge of her life. "You're not just training your body," Michael explained during one particularly tough session. "You're training your mind to believe in the impossible. Every time you step into that pool, you're rewriting your story." Rachel watched her daughter's transformation with a mix of admiration and maternal concern. "Sometimes I'm afraid you're pushing yourself too hard," she confessed one night as she applied ice packs to Sarah's sore shoulders. "Mom," Sarah replied, holding her mother's hands, "for the first time in my life, I'm not pushing myself, I'm discovering myself. Every day in the pool is a chance to find a strength I didn't even know I had." Amanda and Sarah had created a ritual before the more intense training sessions. They would sit at the edge of the pool, feet in the water, and share their fears and hopes. It was in these moments of vulnerability that their friendship grew even stronger. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm strong enough for this," Sarah confessed during one of these conversations. Amanda smiled, squeezing her hand. "Strength isn't about not being afraid," she replied. "It's about moving forward even when the fear feels bigger than we are." Weeks turned into months, and each day brought a small victory. Sarah was not only improving her times, she was rediscovering who she was. The girl who once dreamed of fashion runways now dreamed of something much greater, inspiring others to find their own inner strength. The day of the Paralympic trials dawned with a special quietness, the kind that seems to carry the weight of decisive moments. Sarah woke up before her alarm even went off, her eyes first falling on the national championship medal hanging on the wall, softly glowing with the first rays of sunlight that filtered through the window. In the kitchen, the familiar scent of pancakes greeted her like an embrace. Rachel, her mother, moved with the same grace as always, as if this were just another ordinary day. But her teary eyes and the subtle tremble in her hands revealed that she, too, felt the weight of this moment. "I found something special last night," Rachel said, sliding an old wooden box across the table. Sarah recognized it immediately. It was the memory box her grandmother had left for her. Inside, alongside old photographs and small keepsakes, was her first swimming cap, still marked with her name in shaky childlike handwriting. "Look at this," Sarah murmured, pulling out a yellowed photograph. In it, a 5-year-old girl clung to the edge of the pool, tears mixing with the water on her face. Who would have thought that the little girl scared of water would make it this far? Rachel sat beside her, her hands finding Sarah's across the table. "You've always been stronger than your fears," she said, her voice heavy with emotion. "Even when the whole world doubted, even when you didn't believe in yourself." The aquatic center felt different that morning. The air seemed thicker, laden with the hopes and dreams of dozens of athletes converging for this decisive moment. Sarah took a deep breath as she stepped inside, the familiar scent of chlorine bringing an odd sense of comfort. In the locker room, Amanda was already waiting for her. The two friends embraced without saying a word, sharing a moment of understanding that went beyond words. Their paths had crossed in ways neither could have predicted, and now they were here, ready to take yet another step together on this extraordinary journey. Michael gathered his team for the final instructions, his normally composed face showing traces of emotion he rarely allowed himself to express. 18 months ago, he began, his voice soft but firm, "Some of you could barely get into the water. Today you are not just athletes, you are living proof that limits exist only in our minds." Sarah adjusted her swim cap when a movement in the stands caught her attention. Diana was there but not alone. Next to her, a young woman in a wheelchair was holding a magazine with Sarah on the cover, a recent feature about her journey from the runway to the pool. The headline read, "From the runway to the pool, a story of rebirth." Thomas, her father, arrived minutes before the first race. In his hands was a small blue velvet pouch. "It was your grandmother's," he explained, revealing an old St. Christopher medal. "She wore it during the most important moments of her life. Before she passed, she asked me to keep it for the right moment. I think that moment has come." Sarah held the medal, feeling its weight, not just physically but emotionally. She remembered her grandmother, a strong woman who had raised 3 children alone after being widowed at a young age. She always said that life doesn't give us burdens heavier than we can bear, Thomas said, his voice thick with emotion. You make me believe that every day. Lauren arrived running, her cheeks flushed from the effort of carrying a large poster. It was a collage of photos, a visual timeline of Sarah's transformation. From the frightened girl in the hospital to the determined athlete she was today, each image told a part of this extraordinary story. This is for you so you never forget how much you've already overcome, Lauren said, hugging her friend. And how much you still have to conquer. When the first signal sounded, Sarah was ready. Years of training, months of dedication, countless hours in the water, all converged to this moment. The world around her disappeared, and there was only her and the water, partners in a dance they had perfected together. Between races, Sarah watched her competitors with a new sense of admiration and respect. Maria, who had lost the use of her legs in a car accident, swam with the strength of a controlled storm. João, who was born without arms, sliced through the water with mesmerizing grace. Each athlete there carried their own unique story of overcoming adversity, each of them a living proof that limitations are just the beginning of endless possibilities. During a break, the young woman in the wheelchair approached with Diana. Her name was Clara, and she had started swimming after reading about Sarah's story. You showed me that losing something doesn't mean losing everything, she said, her words touching something deep within Sarah's heart. After reading your story, I started to see my own limitations in a different light. Amanda was competing in the pool next to Sarah, and the two friends exchanged looks of encouragement before each race. Their friendship had transformed into something deeper than competition. It was a partnership based on mutual understanding and unconditional support. It doesn't matter what the outcome is, Amanda whispered before the final race. We've already won just by being here. In the quiet moments between races, Sarah found a chance to talk to Michael. You know what makes me the most proud of you? He said, his eyes revealing an emotion he rarely showed. It's not your times or your medals. It's how you've learned to turn your pain into purpose, how you inspire others to look beyond their limitations. Rachel watched every race with her heart in her throat, her hands clutching the cross she wore around her neck. Next to her, Lauren was photographing every moment, determined to document every second of this extraordinary journey. Thomas, sitting a few rows up, kept his eyes fixed on his daughter, as if trying to make up for all the moments he had missed. At the end of the day, exhausted but fulfilled, Sarah sat by the edge of the pool. The sun was setting on the horizon, painting the water with golden hues that reminded her of the reflections of the runways she once dreamed of conquering. Amanda joined her, the two sharing a silence filled with meaning. Do you remember when we thought our lives were over? Amanda asked, a soft smile on her lips. How silly we were to think that losing something meant losing everything. Sarah took the street Christopher medal her father had given her, feeling its weight in her hands. You know what I've learned in these months? She replied, her voice thick with emotion. That sometimes we need to lose something to find out who we really are. That our greatest falls can lead us to the highest flights. Diana approached with Clara, who was now holding a professional camera. We're documenting stories of overcoming, Diana explained. To show the world that limitations are just the beginning of infinite possibilities. And your story, Sarah, is just the start. That evening, the family gathered for a simple dinner at home. Thomas had cooked, something he hadn't done since Sarah was little. The aroma of homemade lasagna filled the house, bringing back memories of simpler times when the family was still whole. Lauren brought a special dessert, and Michael showed up with a bottle of non-alcoholic wine for a special toast. Around the table, each face told a different part of the same story of transformation and rebirth. To new beginnings, Michael proposed, raising his glass. And to the courage to dive into the unknown, even when fear seems bigger than our strength. Later, alone in her room, Sarah opened her journal. Between its pages, she found the old driver's license of the person who had caused her accident. Reading it again, she realized how her own healing journey had transformed her perspective on forgiveness and fresh starts. With tears in her eyes, she began to write a new entry. Today I understood that sometimes the greatest gifts in life come disguised as tragedies. That our scars aren't marks of weakness, but maps that guide us to our true strength. That sometimes we need to lose the ground beneath our feet to learn to fly. Rachel softly knocked on the door, bringing a cup of chamomile tea, her nightly ritual since the hospital days. Proud is a small word for what I feel for you, she said, sitting on the edge of the bed. You didn't just overcome your limits, you showed others they can overcome theirs too. Sarah hugged her mother, allowing herself to be that small girl again who once feared the water. "Thank you for never letting me give up," she whispered. "Even when I didn't believe in myself anymore." The room was silent, yet filled with unspoken promises. Tomorrow the results of the trials would be announced. But in that moment, lying in her bed with the soft sound of her mother's breath beside her, Sarah already felt victorious. Not just for her achievements in the pool, but for having found a version of herself she never imagined existed. Stronger, more whole, and infinitely freer than the model she once dreamed of being. The morning of the results brought a different kind of silence. Sarah woke to the gentle sound of rain against the window, each drop carrying the weight of expectation. In the kitchen she found a note from her mother. "No matter the result, you're already our champion. With love, Mom." The aquatic center was quiet when Sarah arrived. Michael was waiting for her at the entrance, his serene face masking the anxiety they both shared. "Before we go in," he said, holding a brown envelope, "I want you to read something." Inside the envelope, Sarah found a yellowed letter. It was from Jenny, the first Paralympic athlete Michael had trained 15 years ago. The letter told the story of a young woman who, like Sarah, had found in the water not just a sport, but a path to healing. "Jenny passed away last year," Michael explained softly. "But before she left, she asked me to give this letter to the next person who reminded me of her. Sarah, you have the same spark in your eyes that she did, the unique blend of determination and compassion." Jenny's words touched something deep inside Sarah. "When I lost my legs," she had written, "I thought I had lost my identity. But in the water, I discovered that we are so much more than our bodies. We are the strength of our determination, the reach of our dreams." Amanda arrived at that moment, bringing coffee for everyone. The two friends hugged, sharing a moment of silent understanding. Over the past few months, their friendship had transformed into something precious, forged in the cold mornings of training and deep conversations by the poolside. "Remember our first day together?" Amanda asked, a playful smile tugging at her lips. "You could barely get into the water without shaking. Now look at us." The room where the results would be announced was full of athletes and their families. Rachel held Thomas's hand, years of distance dissolving in the shared concern for their daughter. Lauren filmed everything, determined to document every moment of this extraordinary journey. Diana was there too, with Clara by her side. The young woman had become a constant presence at the training sessions, her own recovery journey inspired by Sarah's story. "You changed my life," Clara whispered, squeezing Sarah's hand. "You showed me that our limitations are just the beginning of our possibilities." The announcement began with the male categories. Sarah observed the faces around her. Some exploded in joy, others tightened in disappointment. Each expression told a story of dedication, sacrifice, and dreams. When it was time for her category, everything seemed to slow down. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the St. Christopher medal against her chest. She thought of her grandmother, of how she always said that life prepares us for moments we never imagined possible. Sarah Bennett? Her name rang out clearly in the silent room. She had made it, she was on the National Paralympic team. Amanda screamed first, jumping in joy. Rachel and Thomas hugged each other, crying openly. Lauren dropped the camera, running to hug her friend. Michael remained still, but his eyes shone with paternal pride. Jenny would be proud, he simply said, his words carrying the weight of years of dedication to Paralympic sports. That night, the celebration was intimate, just family and close friends. Thomas surprised everyone by cooking the spaghetti bolognese that Sarah loved so much as a child. The familiar aroma filled the house with memories of simpler times. During dinner, Diana shared some surprising news. "The magazine wants to do a special feature," she explained. "Not about the model who lost a leg, but about the athlete who found her true path. Clara is going to photograph it. She started a project documenting Paralympic athletes." Sarah looked at Clara, seeing in her the reflection of her own journey of transformation. "Sometimes," Clara said, adjusting her camera, "we need to see someone do the impossible to believe we can too." Lauren brought out an album she had secretly put together. Each page told a different chapter of Sarah's journey, from the awkward early attempts in the pool to her victory at the national championships. The last page was blank, waiting for the photos from the Paralympic Games. "To remind you that every ending is just a new beginning," Lauren said, embracing her friend. Later, Rachel found Sarah on the porch, gazing at the stars. "You know what I'm most proud of in you?" she asked, sitting beside her daughter. "It's not your medals or accomplishments. It's how you turned your pain into something beautiful, something that helps others find their own strength." Sarah held Jenny's letter, reading it again in the soft moonlight. "When you find your purpose," Jenny had written, You'll realize that some doors need to close so that others, much bigger ones, can open. Michael appeared with a preliminary training schedule for the games. The road is going to get harder from here, he warned. But you're not alone on this journey. Amanda, who had also qualified, was already planning how they would organize their training. We're going to need each other more than ever, she said, her face lit up with excitement for the challenge ahead. Before bed, Sarah found another note from her mother on the nightstand. Your grandmother always said that God writes straight with crooked lines. Today, I completely understand what she meant. In the silence of her room, Sarah opened her journal. Among the pages, she found an old photo of herself crying by the poolside. Now, that image no longer brought sadness, it was a reminder of how far she had come. Dear Jenny, she began to write, today I understood what you meant in your letter. The water doesn't just sustain us, it transforms us. And sometimes, our greatest losses guide us to our greatest gifts. The distant sound of thunder announced an approaching storm, but Sarah no longer felt afraid of the unknown. Every raindrop was a promise of renewal, a reminder that life, like water, is always in motion, always leading us to new horizons. Thomas knocked softly on the door, bringing a cup of hot chocolate, just like when she was a child and afraid of storms. Proud is too small a word for what I feel, he said, sitting on the edge of her bed. Sarah took her father's hand, feeling the familiar calluses. Thank you for coming back, she whispered. Sometimes we need to get lost to find our way back home. The night stretched on, but sleep didn't come. Sarah picked up her phone, finding messages of support from people she didn't even know. Other young women who, like Clara, had found hope in her story. Each message was a reminder that her journey was bigger than herself. The real miracle, Sarah thought, gazing at the rain through the window, is not swimming faster or winning medals. It's discovering that we're capable of so much more than we ever imagined. And that our scars, when embraced with love, can turn into bridges that connect us to one another. The morning of the Paralympic Games arrived with the softness of a long-awaited dream. Sarah woke up before the alarm, her eyes first landing on the Brazilian team uniform carefully hung by the window. The sun lazily rose on the horizon, painting the room with golden hues that reminded her of her former life on the catwalk. Rachel gently knocked on the door, bringing not only the usual chamomile tea but also an old wooden box that Sarah immediately recognized. It was her grandmother's memory chest. I found something special while cleaning out the attic, her mother said, sitting on the edge of the bed. Inside the box, along with old photographs and small family treasures, was a yellowed newspaper clipping. The photo showed a 5-year-old Sarah, clinging to the edge of a pool, tears blending with the water on her face. The headline, ironically simple, read, "Fear of water doesn't stop dreams of future model." It's amazing how life prepares us for paths we never even imagined, Rachel whispered, her fingers gently tracing the outline of the young face in the photograph. Your grandmother kept every clipping, every photo of you. She always said you had a special sparkle in your eyes, not of vanity but of determination. At that moment, Amanda entered the room, already dressed in the delegation's uniform. The two friends exchanged a look, and in that instant, all the paths they had traveled together flashed through their minds, the cold training mornings, the shared tears, the small victories celebrated by the poolside. Remember our first training session together? Amanda asked, sitting beside Sarah. You could barely balance on the edge, and look at us now, ready to show the world that limits are just imaginary lines we draw in our minds. The room gradually filled with the people who had been fundamental on this journey. Michael arrived, bringing a surprise that made Sarah's heart stop for a moment. Clara was with him, no longer in her wheelchair, but supported by special crutches, a radiant smile lighting up her young face. I started physical therapy 3 months ago, Clara announced, her eyes shining with a mix of pride and emotion. Your story gave me more than inspiration. It gave me the courage to believe that new beginnings are possible. Next week I start my swimming lessons. Thomas appeared, carrying a small leather suitcase, a gift he had bought especially for this moment. Inside, along with the Street Christopher medal from Sarah's grandmother, was the journal where Sarah had documented every step of her transformation. For you to never forget where you came from, he said, his voice choked with the emotion he was trying to hold back. And to always remember that sometimes our greatest fears hide our greatest gifts. Lauren arrived with her ever-present camera, but this time there was something different in her gaze. She wasn't just a friend capturing moments, she was an artist, capturing the essence of a transformation that went far beyond the physical. Do you know what's most incredible? Lauren said, showing a few photos on her camera. It's not just you who's changed. We've all changed with you. Your story taught us that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the decision to keep moving forward even with fear. Diana surprised everyone by arriving with a special edition of the magazine that had first featured Sarah as a model years ago. The cover was a powerful contrast. On one side, Sarah on the runway, the grace of a professional model. On the other, Sarah emerging victorious from the pool during the Paralympic trials. The headline simply read, "Rebirth, when losing a dream leads us to find our true essence." Before the opening ceremony, Sarah asked for a moment alone. In the quiet of her room, she opened her journal and began to write, her heart overflowing with emotions. "Dear frightened girl by the pool, if you could see me now, you'd understand that our greatest fears often hold our greatest treasures. That sometimes, we need to lose something we love to find something we didn't even know we needed. That our scars are not marks of weakness, but maps that guide us to our true strength." The driver's license that had caused her accident, the one that had remained sealed in her drawer for so long, now rested between the pages of the diary. Sarah read it one last time, no longer with anger or sadness, but with a deep understanding of how that moment of tragedy had transformed into the catalyst for her true journey. The stadium was packed when the Brazilian delegation entered. The weight of thousands of gazes felt different now, not the judgmental gaze of the runway but a deep recognition of human resilience and determination. Rachel, Thomas, and Lauren watched from the stands, their hearts overflowing with a pride that words could not express. Michael watched closely, his eyes revealing the contained emotion of someone witnessing a dream materialize. Clara was photographing every moment, determined to capture the essence of this story of transformation. When Sarah dove into that Olympic pool for the first time, the world around her simply disappeared. There was only her and the water, partners in a dance they had perfected through countless mornings of dedication. Each stroke was more than just a technical move, it was a statement of life, a celebration of possibilities. The medal earned that day represented far more than a sports achievement, it was a symbol of all the lives her story had touched. Of Clara finding the courage to begin her own journey. Of her parents, rediscovering love and unity in the face of adversity. Of Amanda, her companion in the waters of transformation. The night after the competition, the family gathered for an intimate dinner at the Paralympic Village apartment. Thomas cooked the spaghetti bolognese that Sarah had loved so much as a child, Rachel decorated the table with flowers picked from the Olympic garden, and Lauren captured every smile, every shared glance. Diana arrived with a surprise that took Sarah's breath away. Dozens of letters from young people who, inspired by her story, had found the courage to face their own challenges. "See?" Diana said, her eyes filled with tears. "Sometimes our greatest victory is showing others that it's possible to start over." Later, when everyone had already left, Sarah stayed on the balcony of her room, gazing at the starry sky. The air was heavy with promises, with endless possibilities. In her mind, her grandmother's voice seemed to whisper those ancient words of wisdom. "Life doesn't give us burdens greater than we can carry." Michael had said something similar on her first day of training. "The water doesn't judge anyone, it only shows us who we truly are." Now, Sarah fully understood the deep meaning behind those words. Her last thought before falling asleep was of that scared little girl in the old photograph, crying at the edge of the pool. If she could go back in time, she wouldn't change a thing, not even the accident. Because sometimes it's our greatest falls that teach us how to fly higher, our deepest losses that reveal our true strength. And so, as the night wrapped the Paralympic Village in its starry cloak, Sarah Bennett fell asleep not just as a Paralympic medalist, but as someone who had discovered that our greatest victory isn't in never falling, but in how many times we choose to rise again and start over. In her dream, she swam in an infinite ocean of possibilities, each stroke taking her farther on her journey of self-discovery. And in the deep waters of her transformation, she finally found the most precious truth of all, that sometimes we need to lose a dream to find our true destiny. Dear friends who have followed Sarah's journey, every story of overcoming has the power to touch hearts and transform lives. If Sarah's journey sparked something in you, if it brought tears to your eyes or ignited a flame of hope in your heart, share it with us in the comments. Your own story of overcoming might be exactly what someone needs to hear today. Be a part of this community of people who believe in the power of transformation. Join the Life Stories family, a space where real stories inspire new beginnings and remind us that it's never too late to rewrite our own story. Aqui esta a tragicao para o inglês americano, mantendo o tom emotional e a fluidez necessária para a narrativa. If you were moved by this story, give us a like. If you want more stories that showcase the beauty of human resilience, subscribe to the channel. Every subscription helps us continue discovering and sharing extraordinary stories of ordinary people who chose not to give up on their dreams. We'll see you in the next story, where once again we'll celebrate together the transformative power of human courage. With love, the Life Stories team.